It's New Year's Day in 1990, and with all the celebrations of the previous night, combined with the annual UK bank holiday, the usual business in the country grinds to a halt. But if you're an English football fan like me, you know exactly what happens at 3 o'clock today. So it doesn't matter how much anybody drank or danced last night, there are games to be played. And one of these is in the second division at St James's Park in Newcastle. Now for those who don't know, Newcastle is a hell of a long way for any team to travel on New Year's Day of all days. Well, if your name isn't Sunderland or Middlesbrough. But Middlesbrough have already been there and Sunderland aren't due to play them until February. So one unlucky set of fans are going to have to take the grueling trip up north. And that lucky team is... With the players already up there from the night before, Wolves were due to take 3,000 fans to St James's Park. If you're in any way, shape or form normal, then you're either taking the train, a supporters coach or driving there. But within a couple of hours either side of midday, 6 Boeing passenger planes are scheduled to arrive at Newcastle Airport carrying nearly 1,000 people. Some dressed in fancy dress, many of them had some sort of orange or gold clothing, but they all came for a common cause. A near 1,000 strong contingent of Wolves fans have just travelled to Newcastle by an exclusively chartered plane for a second division match on New Year's Day. What on earth could have compelled anyone to even organise this trip, let alone actually doing it? Why were the Wolves fans so excited about a second division away day to Newcastle on New Year's Day? Well, Wolves fans will tell you it's not about the match, but about the journey they've just been on. This club and these fans have been through a lot. Many football fans on this planet can claim that their team is the greatest the world has ever seen, but only one team has ever been officially called world champions without the world seeing them play. This club can boast about winning the championship in every league they've competed in. This club has gone from trophy winners to almost not existing in a few years. They were Wanderers, written off world champions. They are Wolves. The 1950s arrived just in time for Wolverhampton Wanderers to make their name on the domestic stage. After a troubled start to the decade had them fighting for their lives at the bottom of the table, they immediately jolted up the league in 1953, going from 16th to 3rd under the management of former player and England international Stan Collis. The team in gold were filled with high quality local players, 3 of which made the England squad for the 1954 World Cup. Billy Wright, the England captain who became the first player to reach 100 caps, and forwards Dennis Wilshere and Jimmy Mullen, both scoring a combined 16 goals for England. By the time these players were jetting off to Switzerland, they were already celebrating with their Wolves teammates in becoming champions of England for the first time in their history, doing so while laughing in the faces of their local rivals West Bromwich Albion, whom they'd pipped to the title by 4 points. However, within this season, Wolves started installing floodlights at Molineux for the first time, becoming only the 3rd club in England to do so. This wasn't just done to get some cool fancy pics of Molineux in the night sky, but it obviously meant that nighttime football was now possible for Wolves to host. With everyone at the club buzzing about the spectacle of these big new shiny bright lights, the club's secretary organised a series of friendlies with teams across Europe and the world. This included matches against the South African All-11, Celtic and the small case of Budapest Honvéd, arguably the best club side in Europe at that time. Honvéd was home of many of the players that featured in the dominant Hungarian side of the early 50s. Now, some of the best players in the world were on the Black Country doorstep. Wolves dispatched off all their opponents except for First Vienna, crucially beating Honvéd 3-2 in front of 55,000 spectators. This understandably led to an increase of pride and ego amongst those in the English media, and even manager Stan Collis, who claimed Wolves were the champions of the world. Uh-oh, Stan Collis, you have no idea what you've just done. Many journalists were baffled by what Collis just said. One journalist, Willie Meisel, referenced the fact that Honvéd had recently lost to Red Star Belgrade, so are they really the champions of the world? But Wolves managed to make one very important man upset. L'Equipe's own Gabriel Hano. Hano claimed Wolves were inferior to the likes of Real Madrid and AC Milan. He also said, and I'm paraphrasing here, "Let Wolves travel to Moscow and Budapest before they can chat any more like that. Oh, and if the British want to be so big-headed, let's go and create a tournament to see if they're all bark and no bite." Thus, Hano and his colleague Jacques Ferrand wrote a proposal of a tournament format, and the following year, the European Cup was born. Wolves' lights continued to shine as their domestic success ran into the late 50s, finishing in the top 3 for 7 out of the 8 seasons between 53 and 61, bringing home 3 titles, an FA Cup, and scoring at least 100 times in 4 straight seasons. Ultimately, Wolverhampton Wanderers would only compete in the European Cup on 2 occasions, bowing out both times in somewhat humbling fashion. Losing in the first round to German side Schalke 4-3 in 1959, then losing 9-2 on aggregate to Barcelona in the quarter-finals the very next year. But this wouldn't be the last time Wolves ventured across Europe, and in terms of trophies, things were much better before and after this pivotal point. Wolves have had a pretty good knack of securing trophies and reaching finals in the most unique ways possible. They lost the first FA Cup final after the formation of the Football League, 3-0 to Invincibles Preston. No hard deal because 4 years later, they grabbed one of their own, the first in the club's history. 15 years later, Wolves became only the second of 7 teams ever to win the FA Cup whilst playing outside the First Division, doing so by beating one of the best teams in the country, Newcastle, 3-1. Wolves would finish runners-up in the Cup in 1921 again as a second division side, and once again in 1939 as a first division side, before adding 2 more cups to the cabinet in 49 and 60. A 4th place finish in 1971 opened the doors for Wolves to play in the inaugural season of the newly formed UEFA Cup. Despite losing their top goalscorer Bobby Gold to fierce rivals West Brom, a Northern Irishman by the name of Derek Duggan came in to take the reins and lead them on a European charge. Remember that guy, he'll play a very important role in this story soon. Duggan scored a hat-trick in Portugal against Académica in the first round, 2 against ADO Den Haag, 2 against the East Germans, and once at home against the mighty Juventus. Ironically, they faced Hungarian side Ferencváros in the semi-finals, bringing the story to full circle, where a match between Wolves and a Hungarian side would inadvertently start the first European competition. Now, another Hungarian side stands in the way of Wolves and a first European final. In the end, Wolves beat Ferencváros 4-3 on aggregate to reach the final, only to be defeated by Tottenham Hotspur. Once again, it didn't take long for Wolves to bounce back from heartache. 2 years later, they won the Football League Cup, 2-1 against Manchester City, and then again in 1980, 1-0 against the European champions Nottingham Forest, bringing their major trophy total to 9 as the 80s began. But in stark contrast to the 50s, the start of Wolves' success, the 1980s brought Wolves to their lowest point in their entire history. We start this chapter on the 15th of March 1980. Wolves have just beaten Nottingham Forest 1-0 at Wembley Stadium to win the League Cup, thanks to a goal from the former Aston Villa and future Everton striker Andy Gray. Forest would go on to win their second European Cup later that season, whilst Wolves would finish in 6th, qualifying for the UEFA Cup once again. A wonderful start to the decade. Before this success, however, serious redevelopment had taken place at Molineux. The club bought out a number of houses on the street behind the dated main stand to build the brand new and impressive Molineux Street stand. This new stand, which opened in 1979, held 10,000 seats and over 40 executive boxes. A very picturesque stand. It did, however, cost Wolves £3 million, which was crazy money at the time. But what was even crazier is that they did this not long after spending a British record transfer fee of £1.5 million on Andy Gray. How did they finance this, you ask? A few bank loans will do the trick. Hey, I'm not judging, but that could come back to haunt you. Wolves ended up getting relegated 2 years after all of this, and wouldn't you just know it, the club announced they were in debt. £2.6 million worth of debt. Was that new stand really worth it? Well, that's exactly what the fans and the board were thinking, as all fingers pointed straight at Chief Executive Harry Marshall for that painfully costly decision. A group of shareholders then got together and discussed how to remove Marshall from his position. Marshall had no choice but to admit the debt was mostly his doing, but he came up with rescue plans. This included selling Andy Gray for what would eventually be only £250,000, selling an office block in a new stand to the Walsall chairman, or converting the Molineux Hotel into a supermarket. Eventually, a vote was held, and Marshall won? When some of the shareholders called foul play, the rebels issued a writ to overturn the vote, which forced Marshall to resign on the 16th of June. Amongst the several potential replacements, it was initially the former Aston Villa chairman Doug Ellis who took the reins, and almost immediately, having quickly checked the club books, suggested there was no other option but for Wolves to go into liquidation. Money was still owed to other clubs, and at the time, Andy Gray was still being paid more money than the club accountant, secretary, commercial manager and head coach combined. While some still argued against the case, Lloyds Bank, the bank that provided Wolves with almost £2 million, appointed a receiver on the 2nd of July, which meant Wolves had to find a buyer by the end of the month, or the club would officially go out of business. Wolves were down to 3 potential buyers: Doug Ellis himself, a consortium led by the Walsall chairman Ken Weldon, and a group led by property developer brothers Mahmood and Mohammed Bhatti. These brothers needed a well-known and popular figure to be the face of the takeover, so why not bring in our good old friend, Derek Duggan? In the end, the latter option won. With supposed ties to Saudi Arabia, the Bhatti brothers and Duggan had saved the club from extinction. For now.
Chance to see what the Molineux ground might look like in the future, because this is a model of Derek Dugan's plan to involve the football club with the community and to allow the community to use the facilities of that football club. The whole area to include a trade centre, a sports hall, a local polytechnic school, industry, a hotel and living accommodation over 30 acres.
Some fantastic plans there, Wolves. It truly does show off your lofty ambitions for the future, doesn't it?
It's going to cost £21 million, and Wolves are hoping that the government will assist to the tune of £6 million.
£21 million? Who's going to finance that one? Barclays? As you'd expect, the Bhatti ownership quickly turned sour. They failed to secure a deal with the council to build a new stadium, redevelop the Molineux site, or build a leisure park in the town. Sufficient funds were not raised to help the club, and they still couldn't service the debts for that very same stand. Wolves had no money to buy new players and no money to pay their current players. They were relegated to the second division again in 1984. With the situation bleak, the attendances fell to as low as 4,000, as 2 of their old stands were now closed and the third one on the brink of collapse. Wolves were relegated again to the third division. Former manager Bill McGarry came in to manage in September of 1985, but left just 2 months later as he did not want to be associated with the death of one of England's finest clubs. The supporters, already furious, settled on a last-ditch plan. They encouraged the creditors to issue up a winding-up order to stick a fire up the Bhatti of the Bhatti brothers. But the owners, as treacherous as they are, held on to the ownership of the club, failing to improve the squad and failing to pay off the debts. As the season went on, Wolves conceded 98 goals and were relegated for the 3rd season in a row, playing football in the 4th division for the first time ever. In the summer of 1986, with the club facing extinction, a receiver was called for the final time. Soon, Wolverhampton Wanderers would no longer exist, until the council stepped in. The Wolverhampton Council bought Molineux for just over £1 million, whilst 2 companies, including Asda, agreed to pay off the club's debts, with the promise of a superstore being built near the stadium. Wolves had been saved. In November of 1986, Wolves dipped into the open transfer market in search of 2 players. These 2 players happened to be contracted to a team on the other side of the Black Country Divide. However, West Brom weren't too bothered about letting these players go. The 2 men crossed the Black Country Divide from West Brom to Wolves for a combined fee of £60,000. One of the men was a quick and decisive midfielder named Andy Thompson, and the other man was his young and still unproven strike partner.